The world's largest active volcano, Mauna Loa on Hawaii, is erupting for the first time in nearly 40 years, and everyone is keeping an eye on it. When it erupted way back in 1868, it gave rise to one of the greatest natural disasters in Hawaiian history. 77 people died in the tsunami and landslides that resulted from it. But nature is resilient. We saw that with the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980, which devastated the area's wildlife. Not a single tree was left standing within a 6-mile radius of the summit, and an estimated 7,000 big game animals were killed. But within weeks, gophers were digging through the ash in search of food while fallen trees were giving nutrients back to the soil. The new burst in plant growth encouraged the arrival of elk, which increased to record numbers. And the explosion in nature around Mount St. Helens was more diverse than before the eruption. It's this sort of new growth that the prophet is describing in this morning's text. After the Assyrian Empire's complete destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, the prophet spoke of a new day of hope and peace, comparing that day to a tender green shoot growing out of the stump of a tree that had been mowed down, much like you might find in the aftermath of a volcanic eruption. The prophet says the new growth, that branch that would appear, would be someone whose spirit was in alignment with God's own spirit. They would lead the people and judge them. But unlike in the past, their judgments would be decisions that would lift up those who suffer. They would oppose the wicked, not with weapons of destruction, but with the power of words, striking the violent with the rod of their mouth and destroying all wickedness with the breath of their lips, the prophet proclaimed. Instead of girding themselves with weapons of war, the prophet says righteousness will be the belt around their hips and faithfulness the belt around their waist. Christians naturally see these words as pointing to Jesus, but a lot of Bible scholars seem pretty sure that this person about whom the prophet was talking was actually King Hezekiah. When the vision talks of a child leading the people, that child was likely Hezekiah, who gained the throne at the tender young age of 12, and who put into place sweeping religious reforms that included eliminating idolatry and repairing and reopening the temple in Jerusalem. The prophet's vision of peace harkens back to the beginning of all creation, to the abundance and universal harmony within the Garden of Eden. It was a vision of peace that looked nothing like the day in which we currently live, but instead one in which the natural enemies within the animal kingdom lived together in what has become known as the Peaceable Kingdom. In 19th century America, there was a Quaker painter named Edward Hicks, who was most famous for his painting called The Peaceable Kingdom. Hicks is known for his many attempts at trying to get the painting just right. His desire was to get the perfect visual interpretation of the peaceable kingdom. And in all, he painted over 60 versions. You can see on the screen one of those versions. At the end of his life, Hicks confessed that he was not satisfied with his work. He was never able to perfect the peaceable kingdom. If you study the paintings of Edward Hicks, you will notice that over the years, the animals begin to look increasingly ferocious. They lose their sense of contentment, and the light surrounding their face begins to fade. It's reported that in his personal life, Hicks had become deeply troubled by the various theological debates that were tearing apart the relationships in his Quaker family, with his paintings reflecting an absence of any sort of peaceable kingdom. Although Hezekiah was able to achieve significant religious reform, he was unable to bring an end to war and fighting. He too never achieved a peaceable kingdom. And although the message of Jesus was one that returned to the heart of the Torah, a message that urges us to love God with every fiber of our being and to love our neighbor as ourselves, within a few decades, the Roman Empire would completely crush the Jewish revolt and utterly destroy the temple in Jerusalem, seemingly extinguishing any hope for the peaceable kingdom about which Jesus preached. And today, even as we find ourselves looking toward a new day of hope and peace, we also find ourselves vainly searching for a peaceable kingdom. Instead of peace, we're surrounded by greed and violence and destruction. Inflation is exacerbated by corporations that have managed to bring in record profits. Continued mass murders are coupled with ongoing thoughts, prayers, and ineffective gun reform. A former president is denounced by his own political party because he thinks that sitting down to dinner with someone who is a known white nationalist, anti-Semite, and Holocaust denier is a swell idea. And so we find ourselves like our spiritual ancestors, waiting for a new day and waiting for someone to lead us into that new day. But even as the world around us swirls with violence, the Advent season provides us with the opportunity to look within and pray for the reality of a peaceable kingdom within our own spirits. It may feel like a fairy tale, this peaceable kingdom which the prophet envisions. It's tempting to give ourselves over to feelings of hopelessness and discouragement, telling ourselves that it's a pie-in-the-sky dream, one which will never become a reality. It's too big, we say. But big things always start from small beginnings. They start from small mustard seeds that grow into large bushes, from a pinch of yeast that leavens a loaf of bread, from tender shoots that grow out of stumps that by all appearances seem to be dead, and from an insignificant baby born to a peasant couple in a nondescript out-of-the-way manger. Big things start from a handful of people who gather in a queer church's social hall, people committed to the work that it will take to get a local non-discrimination ordinance passed. People like me who at times find myself feeling discouraged and overwhelmed, but managing to draw strength from those around me who are still hopeful and energized. Maybe you are feeling discouraged and overwhelmed too. Maybe you are tired and see no end in sight to the things that are weighing you down. Maybe you are looking for someone to lead you out of the mess in which you find yourself. Maybe you're waiting for a new day. If so, then welcome to this season of Advent, marked by anticipation and waiting and hope. The long night of waiting can be grueling if we try to make it through on our own, but it becomes a spiritual experience when we band together. So let's wait for the dawn of a new day, and let's do it together. Let's lift one another up and draw strength from each other as we work toward the peaceable kingdom in which the prophet envisioned. But instead of standing around gazing upward and wondering when the kingdom will come, let's start practicing the peaceable kingdom right now. Instead of seeking revenge and plotting the snappy comeback, let's try turning the other cheek. Instead of spouting off words of division and anger, let's try speaking kindly to one another. And instead of surrendering to the powers of injustice, let's be bold in standing up for the oppressed. Instead of abusing creation with our pollution and garbage, let's be caretakers of all living things. As the song says, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Amen.